Imagine you spend, I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars here. You spend all of that on a state-of-the-art security system.
Oh, yeah. The absolute best money can buy.
Exactly. You install facial recognition cameras at, like, every conceivable angle.
Yeah.
You hire these armies of mathematical savants to track probabilities, and you deploy this crazy software that monitors every single microtransaction happening on your property.
Right, you're trying to build a fortress.
Yeah. You do all of this to protect your business from the statistical risks you've modeled. And this is the crazy part. After all that brilliant preparation, you lose $100 million in a single afternoon.
Wow.
And why? Because your star performer gets attacked by his own pet tiger on stage.
It's just the ultimate paradox of modern risk management, isn't it?
It really is.
Like, the models are pristine, they look perfect on paper, but the reality is fundamentally unmanageable.
So today, we are taking you into the architecture of that exact paradox. We are looking at why the smartest, most highly educated risk models in the world and the people who build them honestly are fundamentally broken when they actually encounter the real world.
Yeah, we're stepping into a fascinating text today.
We really are, specifically a chapter titled The Ludic Fallacy, or The Uncertainty of the Nerd. And it completely deconstructs the false comfort of the mathematical formulas we all rely on. You know, the ones we use to navigate our lives, our finances, our careers.
To really get this, I want you to picture a split screen in your mind.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
So on the left side, you have this sterile, highly organized mathematics classroom. The equations on the chalkboard are neat, the parameters are completely defined, and every problem has a singular correct answer sitting at the back of the textbook.
Right. Very safe.
Exactly. Now, on the right side of the screen, you have a chaotic, bustling Brooklyn street corner. Total opposite. People haggling, cars swerving, unwritten rules, and just hidden agendas governing every single interaction. Today's source material really challenges the assumption that you can take the tools from that sterile classroom and somehow use them to survive on that chaotic street.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we are going to examine why the quote-unquote smartest people, you know, the ones with the advanced degrees and the flawless test scores, so often fail spectacularly outside the academy.
They really do.
And more importantly, we want to arm you with the conceptual tools to truly see the unexpected, to spot the completely unpredictable events, what the author terms Black Swans, that are just hiding in plain sight while everyone else is like busy looking at the spreadsheet.
But before we can even begin to pull apart those massive structural flaws in our global risk models or dissect why casinos get blindsided by tigers, we have to establish a fundamental division in human cognition.
Right.
The text sets this up by demanding we understand the difference between academic thinking and ecological thinking.
And the author illustrates this divide by introducing two incredibly vivid characters. We have to start with Fat Tony.
Oh, Fat Tony is great.
He's amazing. So Tony is a prosperous, heavily accented Brooklyn native, but he relocated to New Jersey a couple of decades ago.
Yeah, moved out to the burbs.
Right. And he battles his weight constantly. He travels to these expensive fat farms in Arizona to starve himself.
Only to immediately regain all the pounds by eating excessively in his first-class seat on the flight back home.
Exactly. It's such a great detail. And his wardrobe, he wears these custom-tailored suits from Rome that somehow end up looking like cheap catalog knockoffs on his frame.
Yeah, the text says he wears a gold wrist chain, has thick, hairy hands, and smells overwhelmingly of licorice candies.
Licorice candies.
Yeah, because he consumes them by the truckload after quitting smoking.
So the physical description is super colorful.
Yeah.
But the mechanics of Tony's mind are what actually matter here.
Right. Because he began his career as a lowly clerk in the back office of a massive New York bank in the early 1980s. He was relegated to pushing papers in the letter of credit department.
But he didn't climb the traditional corporate ladder, though. Like, he figured out the underlying machinery of the environment he was in.
Yeah, he realized very quickly that giant monster banks are not these monolithic symbols of financial genius. They are just clumsy bureaucracies.
Right.
So he figured out what the bureaucracy wanted to see on paper, and he started acquiring property in bankruptcy proceedings. His driving insight was incredibly simple, but just devastatingly effective.
Which was what?
He realized a bank employee who was tasked with selling a foreclosed house does not actually care about the property.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because it is not their personal house.
Exactly. Tony's entire philosophy is built on finding the sucker. He knows how to maneuver because he understands human nature, incentive structures, and and just the general apathy of the bureaucrat.
And he makes money effortlessly because he melds his business deals right into his gregarious private life. Like, he's the guy who always gets the unlisted phone numbers.
Yeah.
The free first-class upgrades. The prime spot in the officially full parking garage.
He just knows a guy.
He always knows a guy. The text notes that taking a walk around the block with Tony leaves you feeling considerably more informed about the literal texture of the world just by talking to him. He operates purely on street smarts.
Now, contrast that ecological intelligence with our second character.
Dr. John.
Yes, Dr. John. He is a former engineer. He is thin, wiry, precise, and favors a dark, unassuming suit.
Very different vibe.
Very. He holds a PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Texas at Austin, and he currently works as an actuary running complex computer simulations for a major insurance company.
Dr. John is basically a masterclass in linear predictability. Like, he quietly reads the newspaper on his train commute to Manhattan, and he neatly folds it so he can finish it exactly during his lunch hour. He meticulously packs his own sandwich and fruit salad every single morning. He enforces a rigid, impermeable line between his work time and his leisure time. He operates entirely on schedules, formulas, and neatly packaged data sets.
So the text forces these two distinct minds into a collision course using a pure thought experiment.
Right.
It's designed to isolate exactly how they process uncertainty. So the author asks both men the identical question. Imagine a coin is flipped. We establish the initial premise that it is a perfectly fair coin possessing an equal 50-50 probability of coming up heads or tails.
Okay, a fair coin.
Right. The author then says, I flip this coin 99 times and it comes up heads every single time. What are the odds of me getting tails on the 100th throw?
And Dr. John, the actuary with the PhD, provides the academically correct answer.
Yeah.
He states that the odds remain 1/2 or 50%. And, I mean, his reasoning is mathematically flawless, right? The initial assumption stated it was a fair coin and every flip is an independent draw. The previous 99 heads exert zero mathematical influence on the physics of the next flip.
Exactly. Dr. John is thinking strictly inside the parameters he was handed. He accepts the premise of the problem as an unshakable law of the universe.
But then, and I love this part, the author poses the exact same scenario to Fat Tony. 99 heads in a row, what are the odds of tails on the next flip?
And Tony immediately answers that the odds are less than 1%.
Less than 1%.
Yeah. And the author challenges him, reminding him of the initial assumption that it is a fair coin. Tony's response cuts straight to the core of the issue. He tells the author that you are either full of crap or a pure sucker to buy that 50% business.
Oh.
He concludes that the coin must be loaded. It cannot possibly be a fair game. He even leans in and whispers that people like Dr. John think too slowly and are destined to be taken for a ride.
I mean, what's fascinating here is the underlying epistemology.
What's fascinating here is that Dr. John embodies what the text defines as Platonic knowledge. This is sterile, rule-bound classroom intelligence. It relies on the assumption that the world conforms to ideal forms and theoretical models. If we place Dr. John and Fat Tony in a controlled academic setting and give them an IQ test, Dr. John destroys Tony.
Right. But let me push back on this for a moment. In a vacuum, math is math. If I am getting onto an airplane or driving over a suspension bridge, I want Dr. John running the stress tests.
Sure.
I want the guy who follows the rigid mathematical models, not Fat Tony operating on gut instinct and, like, vibes. Isn't there a massive danger in completely abandoning Platonic models just because they are sterile? I mean, we need Dr. John to keep society functioning.
That's a great point. And we absolutely need Dr. John when we are dealing with closed systems, engineering, physics, aerodynamics. These are domains where the rules are largely fixed by the laws of nature.
Okay, that makes sense.
A steel beam has a calculable tensile strength. Gravity acts predictably. In those closed systems, Platonic models are incredibly useful. The danger arises when we take Dr. John's closed-loop thinking and apply it to open systems.
Open systems being human behavior, financial markets, global politics.
Precisely. In an open ecological situation, the rules are never guaranteed. The parameters can change without warning. Tony wins in the real world because he questions the foundational assumption of the game itself.
He looks outside the box.
Exactly. Statistically speaking, if a coin lands on heads 99 times, the mathematical probability of that happening naturally with a fair coin is so infinitesimally small that it is infinitely more likely that the initial premise of fairness is a lie, a trick, or a mechanical flaw.
So Dr. John is actually the one making the irrational leap.
Yes.
He is choosing to believe in a near-impossible statistical anomaly rather than questioning the integrity of the person flipping the coin.
People like Dr. John cause catastrophic, unexpected disasters, the Black Swans, because their minds are entirely closed to the possibility that the box itself is flawed. They mistake the rules of a temporary game for the immutable laws of physics.
Right.
The text fundamentally redefines the concept of the nerd. A nerd isn't just someone with a pocket protector. A nerd is anyone who thinks exceedingly inside the box. Tony is acting scientifically in the truest sense of the word.
How so?
Well, he observes the empirical texture of reality, the 99 consecutive heads, and he adjusts his hypothesis based on the overwhelming evidence, rather than blindly trusting the theoretical premise he was spoon-fed.
Wow. It explains so much about the trajectory of our lives. Like, the educational system rewards you for playing inside a perfectly sterilized box. You memorize the parameters, you apply the formula, you get the gold star.
Right.
But the moment you leave the university, there is no syllabus. The people handing you the tests might be lying to you about the rules.
And this leads to the most dangerous illusion we face as an intelligent society. The widespread belief that the domesticated uncertainty we encounter in exams and games is the exact same species of uncertainty we face in real life.
So we see this academic rigidity fail in theory with a coin flip. The source material then takes us into a scenario where we watch it fail in practice among the world's top risk experts gathered in the ultimate sterilized environment. The author brings us to fake Como.
Fake Como, yeah. So the author receives an invitation from a United States Defense Department think tank to attend a high-level brainstorming symposium on risk.
Right.
The organizer pitches the gathering over the phone as a relaxed lunch on a terrace overlooking Lake Como.
Sounds nice, but the reality is a bit different. The author discovers that this Lake Como is actually a fake replica located inside a sprawling Las Vegas casino.
Right.
He initially views Las Vegas as an intellectual wasteland, calling the idea of spending time at a fake Como torture. But the assembly of minds at this symposium ends up completely upending his expectations.
It was a closed-door gathering of practitioners, doers, and scholars from a radically diverse set of disciplines. The room included military personnel, high-level finance practitioners, academics.
And even a professional gambler, right?
Yes, a gentleman who managed a syndicate of professional gamblers and had been subsequently banned from most casinos.
That is quite the guest list.
Yeah.
But the dynamic that unfolds among these groups completely shatters our standard stereotypes.
Completely.
Like, you would typically assume that military personnel people who operate within strict chains of command and rigid operational protocols would be the most boxed-in thinkers in the room. But the text reveals that the military attendees, which included an assistant secretary of defense and an engineering investigator who analyzed the space shuttle explosion, were the true philosophers of the group.
They exhibited an introspective intellectual honesty that the academics entirely lacked. The author observes that they were not the war-hungry autocrats portrayed in popular media. Many of them were actively strategizing ways to eliminate potential geopolitical dangers without kinetic warfare. A prime example discussed was the historical strategy of bankrupting the Soviet Union by forcing an unsustainable escalation in defense spending rather than engaging in direct combat.
They were actively searching for the off-model solutions.
Yeah.
Because the consequences of failure for them aren't just a bad grade or a lost bonus.
Yeah.
The consequences are catastrophic losses of human life.
They were deeply invested in the epistemology of risk, specifically the concept of unknown unknowns. Military minds, unlike corporate executives playing with shareholder money or academics protecting theoretical reputations, are forced to confront genuine, raw randomness.
And we get a sharp contrast with one specific academic at this symposium. The text highlights a stuffy political science professor.
Oh, this guy.
He's described as incredibly dry, hyper-protective of his big-name reputation in the academic world. He offers absolutely nothing outside the box, refusing to even smile. The author even entertains himself by imagining a rat being dropped down this professor's collar, just to picture him in a state of wriggling, unpredictable panic.
The professor is a master of building neat, platonic models of game theory in his office. But when the actual practitioners in the room begin pressing him, pointing out his improper use of financial metaphors and challenging the real-world application of his theories, his arrogance just evaporates.
He possesses zero ecological intelligence to defend his work when the parameters are removed.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about the difference between someone who reviews umbrellas on a spreadsheet in a dry office versus a sailor trying to keep a boat afloat in a Category 5 hurricane.
That's a perfect analogy.
The academic can tell you the precise tensile strength of the umbrella canopy, But the military strategist is the one who actually gets wet, who feels the wind shift, and who has to figure out how to survive when the umbrella snaps in half.
And the choice of venue for this symposium, the fake Lake Como inside a Vegas complex, provides a thick layer of irony. This defense think tank gathered to discuss wild, untamed, unpredictable uncertainty, yet they isolated themselves inside a casino.
A building dedicated to the exact opposite.
Yes. The author actually prepared a presentation for this symposium to expose this very irony. He wanted to explain to the room why casinos are the absolute worst places on earth to study real-world uncertainty. And he coins the term that anchors this entire deep dive.
The ludic fallacy.
The ludic fallacy.
The word ludic derives from ludus, the Latin word for games.
Mm.
The ludic fallacy is the fatal mistake of assuming that the domesticated, sterilized uncertainty we encounter in games of chance is equivalent to the wild, undefined uncertainty we face in reality.
When you step onto a casino floor, the environment is engineered to provide the illusion of risk. You know the exact rules of blackjack. You can calculate the precise mathematical odds of a roulette wheel. The payouts for every specific outcome are explicitly capped. Most importantly, the rules do not spontaneously rewrite themselves. As the author points out, the casino will never suddenly redesign the roulette wheel on a Tuesday so that 36 black hits 95% of the time.
The dealer in blackjack isn't going to look at you and say, the rules have changed. The jack of spades is now a penalty card, and because you jew it, the casino gets to confiscate your car.
Exactly.
The parameters are permanently locked.
And this locked environment represents what the text classifies as mild randomness or Gaussian randomness. It follows the predictable bell curve. Given enough spins of the wheel or rolls of the dice, the outcomes cluster around a known average.
I want to pause here because this distinction between types of randomness feels incredibly important. I don't want to gloss over it. The text contrasts this mild Gaussian randomness with something called Mandelbrottian randomness. How do those actually differ mechanically?
Let's unpack the mechanics of it. Gaussian randomness, the bell curve, applies to things that have physical or natural limits. Think about human height. If you gather 10,000 people in a stadium, the vast majority will be between 5 and 6 feet tall. You'll have some outliers. Maybe a few people who are 4 feet tall or 7 feet tall. But if you add the tallest man in recorded human history to that stadium, his height does not meaningfully change the average height of the 10,000 people.
Right.
The single outlier cannot dominate the aggregate.
Because human biology puts a hard cap on the variance.
Mm-hmm.
No one is 1,000 feet tall.
Exactly. But Mandelbrottian randomness, named after the mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot, who pioneered fractal geometry, deals with wild, scalable randomness.
Wild randomness.
Yes. This applies to open systems without natural ceilings, like wealth distribution, book sales, or financial markets. If you gather 10,000 average people in a stadium and calculate their average net worth, you get a recognizable number. But if Bill Gates walks into that stadium, the total wealth in the room suddenly jumps by tens of billions of dollars. That single extreme outlier completely invalidates the average of the previous 10,000 people.
So in Mandelbrottian randomness, the extreme exception dictates the entire reality.
Yes. Real life operates in the Mandelbrottian domain. You do not know the odds. The sources of uncertainty are entirely undefined. The rules mutate without warning.
The text actually takes a massive swing at classical economists here, targeting Frank Knight specifically. Economists often rely on a distinction between Knightian risks, which are uncertainties you can accurately compute, and Knightian uncertainty, which are variables you cannot compute.
Right.
The author argues that computable risks are laboratory contraptions. If Frank Knight or his followers ever took actual ecological risks, they would realize that computable risks are virtually non-existent in the wild.
Yet our society spontaneously associates the concept of chance with these sterilized games. The author expresses intense frustration regarding the visual branding of his own work.
Oh, the book covers.
Yes. Two separate illustrators working on a paperback edition of one of his books independently decided to place images of playing dice on the cover and at the start of every chapter.
Even though the editor explicitly warned the design team to avoid the ludic fallacy.
Right. But the illustrators were biologically programmed to conflate probability with casino games.
But, okay, if the bell curve and these game theory models are fundamentally ill-equipped to handle wild randomness, why do we base our entire educational infrastructure on them? Business schools, economics programs, risk management certifications, they all require students to master these exact models.
The Text suggests we are dealing with a form of institutional brainwashing. Historically, probability was not always a rigid mathematical construct. If you look back to classical thinkers like Cicero, probability was considered fuzzy.
Fuzzy.
Yeah, it was a liberal art birthed from skepticism. It was a way of navigating doubt, not eliminating it.
Because uncertainty is inherently unmeasurable.
But the Enlightenment era ushered in a demand for calculable certainty. Western thinking became obsessed with creating a rigid mechanistic view of the universe. We wanted tools to banish doubt entirely.
There is a reference to a treatise published in 1673 by a palmist named Simon Feucher that feels like a psychological skeleton key for this whole problem.
No, absolutely.
Feucher argues that human beings are dogma-prone from our mother's wombs. We find the state of doubt so deeply uncomfortable that we rush to exit prematurely in order to produce what we call science.
We crave certainty so desperately that we will latch onto a deeply flawed mathematical model just to stop feeling the anxiety of not knowing the future.
This psychological vulnerability fuels the confirmation error. We observe that probability theory flawlessly predicts the behavior of dice in a casino. We then falsely claim that this mathematical success applies universally to the messy, real world. We desperately want the world to be solvable, so we force a solvable template over it.
We mistake the map for the territory.
Exactly. We pretend we are operating safely inside the Platonic fold, the controlled environment where the rules are known. But the most glaring, undeniable irony of this entire text is that even the casino itself, the physical embodiment of the ludic fallacy, cannot escape real-world uncertainty.
To prove the sheer danger of relying on these models, the author examines the actual history of the Las Vegas casino hosting the symposium. He looks past their mathematical risk models to expose the terrifying, real-world events that nearly destroyed them.
Because the casino believed their primary vulnerabilities were mathematical. They worried about a lucky gambler going on an astronomical winning streak and draining the vault, or sophisticated cheaters systematically defrauding the tables.
Right.
To mitigate these risks, they spent hundreds of millions of dollars on surveillance technology that the author compares to a James Bond movie set. They tracked the card counters, monitored the dealers, and obsessed over the standard deviations.
But an elementary understanding of probability reveals that a massive casino is sufficiently diversified across thousands of hands played simultaneously. They do not face genuine existential risk from a lucky patron.
Right, the math protects them.
Exactly. Even the high rollers, the whales flown in from overseas to wager millions, are statistically predictable. Assuming no cheating occurs, the aggregate win-loss ratio remains remarkably stable over time.
The models perfectly accounted for the variables on the casino floor. But the models were entirely blind to the variables outside the casino floor. The text details 4 specific black swans, 4 catastrophic events that resulted in massive financial losses, or the near loss of their operating license.
Let's break down the 4 casino black swans because they perfectly illustrate what wild randomness actually looks like.
Okay, let's do it.
The first black swan is a highly publicized tragedy you might actually remember from the news. The casino suffered a loss of approximately $100 million when the irreplaceable star performer in their main theatrical attraction was suddenly maimed by a tiger on stage.
The Siegfried and Roy incident. Now, I assume the casino's actuaries had some sort of insurance policy for animal attacks, right?
They did run scenario analyses. They had conceived of the possibility that a wild animal might jump into the crowd and attack an audience member. They had modeled that specific liability. But the tiger in question had been raised by the performer since it was a cub. It reportedly even slept in his bedroom. The risk models completely failed to account for the possibility of the animal inexplicably turning on its own master mid-performance. It was a completely off-model risk.
You cannot input the shifting psychological mood of a tiger into a Gaussian bell curve.
No, you can't.
The second black swan exposes a different kind of unpredictability. A contractor who had suffered an injury during the construction of new hotel annex felt deeply offended by the financial settlement the casino offered him. To retaliate, he attempted to dynamite the entire complex.
Yeah, he managed to place explosives around the structural pillars in the basement of the casino.
The author notes the surreal experience of sitting in a symposium discussing theoretical risk management while realizing he might be sitting directly above a pile of live dynamite.
It's terrifying.
There is no mathematical equation that predicts a disgruntled construction worker opting for domestic terrorism over a contract dispute. It exists entirely outside the rules of the game.
The third black swan shifts from malice to sheer bureaucratic absurdity.
This one is my favorite.
By law, casinos must file specific tax forms with the Internal Revenue Service documenting gamblers' profits if they exceed a certain threshold. A specific employee, tasked with mailing these forms, simply stopped doing it. For entirely inexplicable reasons, rather than mailing the documents, he began hiding them in boxes underneath his desk.
Wait, he just hid them. And he did this for years,
Yeah.
just hoarding critical tax documents under his legs.
No one in the sophisticated surveillance apparatus noticed until it triggered a massive federal problem. The casino faced the potential revocation of their gambling license, which would have functionally terminated the business overnight.
Wow.
They managed to avoid closure by paying a monstrous, undisclosed fine to the government. It wasn't an elaborate heist or mathematical failure. It was just a single employee acting with profound, unexplainable irrationality.
And the fourth Black Swan reads like a Hollywood script. The casino owner's daughter was kidnapped.
Yeah.
To secure the cash required for the ransom, the owner knowingly violated strict gambling regulations by withdrawing money directly from the casino's operating coffers.
When you aggregate the financial impact of these four events, the tiger, the dynamite, the hoarded IRS forms, and the ransom money, and compare them to the money lost to card counters or lucky gamblers, the ratio is staggering. The off-model hits swamped the mathematically predicted on-model risks by a factor of nearly 1,000 to 1.
1,000 to 1. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars tracking the trajectory of every single playing card on the floor, while 99.9% of their actual financial danger materialized from messy, psychological, unpredictable human and animal behavior operating entirely outside their platonic fold.
The text includes a brilliant analogy from a colleague named Mark Spitznagel that crystallizes this vulnerability. He compares the ludic fallacy to organized martial arts competitions.
Okay, how so?
When an athlete trains for competitive fighting, they focus intensely on the codified rules of the sport. They learn the exact mechanics of scoring points, the boundaries of the mat, and the time limits enforced by the referee.
But that hyperfocus requires them to actively ignore possibilities that aren't permitted by the rules.
Yes. The athlete who wins the Olympic gold medal in a highly regulated martial art might actually be the most vulnerable person in a chaotic street fight. In an alleyway, there are no padded mats. There are uneven curbs. There is no referee. There might be multiple attackers or a hidden knife or a sudden strike to the groin.
Right.
The Olympic athlete's brain has been rigorously trained to expect a fair fight within defined parameters. They have trained themselves to be completely blind to off-model risks.
We do the exact same thing when we plan our lives. We obsess over the on-model variables. We worry about missing a quarter sales target by 2%. We worry about our child getting a B+ instead of an A on their report card. But the events that fundamentally alter the trajectory of our lives are the tigers, the hoarded IRS forms, the sudden phone call from a doctor, or the geopolitical shock that disrupts a global supply chain. It's always the things we never even conceived of putting into our spreadsheets.
Which brings us to the most critical caution of this analysis. If off-model risks dictate 1,000 times more impact than on-model risks, why does our society persistently, systematically ignore them? What is the cognitive mechanism that keeps us blind?
The author hits upon the unifying theory behind the systemic blindness during a cocktail party in Munich. He is attending a gathering at the apartment of a former art historian, spending his time in the English-speaking corner drinking high-quality Riesling.
Nice setup.
Yeah. He gets cornered by a prominent computer entrepreneur named Yossi Vardi. Vardi issues a challenge, asking the author to summarize the core thesis of his work while standing on one leg.
A physical demand for extreme intellectual conciseness.
But the author admits he has consumed too much perfumed Riesling and he fails to deliver in the moment. He stumbles through a vague answer. However, the following day, he experiences what the French call l'esprit de l'escalier, or staircase wit.
Ah, staircase wit. The perfect reply that only materializes when it is too late to use it.
His staircase wit strikes him so powerfully he jumps out of bed. The grand unifying idea is this. The cosmetic and the platonic rise naturally to the surface.
Let's examine the mechanics of that phrase. The text argues that the human brain possesses a natural, inescapable gravitational pull toward the tangible. We are mesmerized by the cosmetic. We crave confirmation, visibility, concrete metrics, and emotional resonance.
We naturally revere things that look and sound official. We respect scholarly verbiage, the prestige of Harvard Business School, the gravitas of a Nobel Prize, or a financial analyst wearing a dark suit and a Ferragamo tie.
Right.
We favor the narrated. We are addicted to stories that provide a clear cause and effect, a discernible beginning, middle, and end.
And because our attention is entirely captured by the cosmetic surface, we systematically ignore what the author identifies as silent evidence. We only respect what has visibly occurred. We entirely discount what could have occurred, but narrowly did not.
We just don't see it.
We fail to anticipate black swans because we only allocate worry to the dramatic, highly visible events of the past, remaining blind to the abstract, unseen possibilities incubating in the future.
Does this mean we are just biologically doomed to be shallow thinkers? I mean, is it simply too demanding for the human hardware to constantly scan the horizon for the unseen?
The text proposes that, given our current evolutionary hardware, we are indeed not intuitively designed to process abstract matters. Randomness is a profound abstraction. The author offers a beautiful metaphor to illustrate the cognitive cost of seeing uncertainty.
Oh, the moon one.
Yeah. Imagine trying to observe the dark side of the moon. It does not reflect light naturally. To see it, you would have to actively beam a massive amount of energy onto its surface. In the exact same way, beaming mental light onto the unnarrated, the abstract, and the unseen requires a tremendous expenditure of cognitive energy.
The brain is fundamentally lazy. It uses narrative as a compression algorithm to save processing power.
Yes. It is biologically cheaper and easier to accept the well-organized schema handed to us. This is the root of the problem of induction. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it perfectly explains why Dr. John, the straight-A student who spent decades mastering the highly visible narrated structure of academic testing, is inherently susceptible to the ludic fallacy.
He has spent his entire life looking at the brightly illuminated side of the moon.
Exactly. He excels at manipulating the cosmetic presentation of the math problem.
Fat Tony succeeds because his ecological intelligence forces him to expend the energy to look past the cosmetic presentation. When you hand Tony a fair coin, he doesn't just look at the shiny surface of the metal. He looks at the person handing it to him.
He looks for the hustle.
He looks for the hidden, unnarrated reality behind the transaction.
Which brings us to the ultimate utility of this source material. If our default biological setting renders us vulnerable to the ludic fallacy and the seductive comfort of narratives, what is the actionable prescription? How do we train ourselves to see the tiger before it strikes?
The text suggests the solution begins by examining how human beings have historically elevated themselves. Throughout history, societies have aggressively manufactured systems to artificially lengthen the distance between themselves and their primate ancestors.
It is a foundational theme of civilization. The ancient Greeks created the concept of the barbarian to distinguish themselves from outsiders whose language sounded to them like animalistic shrieks.
The English aristocracy constructed the archetype of the gentleman, a class defined by idleness and a labyrinthine code of manners, explicitly designed to separate them from the physical, animalistic labor of survival. New Yorkers attempt to distance themselves from those living in Queens by obsessing over the prestige of a Manhattan zip code.
Philosophically, this desire for separation is everywhere. You see it in Nietzsche's early dichotomy between the Apollonian ideals of order and reason versus the Dionysian instincts of chaos, or his later development of the Übermensch.
Right.
You see it in the modern adoption of Stoicism, which attempts to use a dignified framework of virtue to completely sever a person's emotional state from the raw, unpredictable results of their efforts in the world.
The author acknowledges all these historical attempts, but points out that when we are forced to make decisions under uncertainty, the psychological distance between us and our hairy cousins vanishes rapidly. We revert to fast, instinctual reactions. To combat this, the author proposes a single, radical step to achieve a higher form of cognitive life. The directive is to denarrate.
Denarrate. It requires active dismantling.
The text provides highly specific, actionable steps to execute this. Shut down the television set, minimize the time you spend consuming daily newspapers, ignore the endless stream of blogs and commentary.
On the surface, advising someone to stop reading the news sounds like a recipe for willful ignorance. But when you examine it through the lens of the ludic fallacy, it becomes a crucial strategy for cognitive self-defense.
How so?
What does the daily news apparatus actually do? It takes the wild, Mandelbrosian randomness of global events and artificially forces it into a neat, digestible, cosmetic narrative. The news tells you exactly why the stock market dropped yesterday, assigning a tidy, singular cause to an incomprehensibly complex web of effects.
It gives you the illusion of the X-ray. It makes the muddy, chaotic waters of reality look crystal clear. By consuming that constant stream of post-hoc narrative, you are actively training your brain to remain inside the Platonic fold.
You are feeding your own susceptibility to the ludic fallacy by pretending the world operates according to a script.
So what does this all mean? How does this apply to the way we execute our daily work? The text uses a term that flips conventional wisdom on its head: focusing, or what he also terms tunneling.
Yeah.
Now, from a young age, we are taught that focus is an absolute virtue. If you are a watchmaker repairing a delicate gear, or a surgeon operating on a spine, or a chess grandmaster visualizing a board, you absolutely must focus. You have to narrow your cognitive vision to the highly specific rules and mechanics of the task directly in front of you.
But the author issues a stark warning. The absolute worst tactical error you can make when dealing with wild uncertainty is to focus. When you focus intensely on the rules of the game, just as the casino obsessively watched the blackjack tables for card counters, you develop massive catastrophic blind spots to the dynamite sitting in the basement.
I love the phrase he uses. You should tell uncertainty to focus, not us. Tunneling makes you the sucker at the table. It translates directly into a failure of prediction.
Because prediction, not narration, is the ultimate test of our actual understanding of the world. Anyone can look backward, narrate the past, and make a historical event look inevitable. It is vastly more difficult and infinitely more vital to maintain a wide, open, skeptical view of the future without prematurely collapsing the possibilities into a rigid, comfortable model.
We have dissected a massive amount of conceptual architecture today. We started with Fat Tony in Brooklyn, smelling of licorice, demonstrating that true intelligence is spotting the sucker and questioning the rules of the game.
We contrasted his ecological brilliance with the hyper-organized Dr. John, who trusts the parameters of the coin flip all the way to his own detriment.
We traveled to a fake Lake Como in a Vegas casino where military strategists sought the unknown unknowns while academics clung desperately to their theoretical spreadsheets.
We explored the mechanics of the ludic fallacy, pulling apart the difference between the Gaussian randomness of a casino and the wild, Mandelbrosian unpredictability of real life. We examined how the casino's multi-million-dollar surveillance apparatus perfectly predicted the cards,
but completely failed to predict the tiger, the dynamite, the hoarded IRS forms, and the kidnapping.
We confronted the uncomfortable truth that the cosmetic and the narrated will always naturally rise to the surface of our attention, blinding us to silent evidence unless we actively expend the cognitive energy to shine a light on the dark side of the moon.
And finally, we discussed the radical necessity of denarrating our lives, shutting off the neat, tidy stories the media feeds us, escaping the trap of tunneling, and keeping our minds wide open to genuine uncertainty.
It demands a complete paradigm shift. It requires you to abandon the comforting illusions of control and predictability that your educational and professional systems have spent decades instilling in you.
So as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final challenge to mull over. Take a hard look at the biggest plans you are operating on right now. It could be your trajectory for ascending the corporate ladder, your carefully balanced retirement portfolio, or the 5-year plan you have mapped out for your family.
You have almost certainly calculated your odds of success based on a set of rules you believe to be true, much like Dr. John calculating the odds of that coin flip.
But I want you to ask yourself, what is the tiger in the bedroom of your life? What is the completely off-model, unnarrated assumption you are relying on right now that, if it suddenly broke, would render every single one of your careful calculations entirely irrelevant?
That is the ultimate test of your ability to navigate uncertainty. When you evaluate the odds of your own future, are you only staring at the numbers on the dice? Or are you looking closely at the person who is handing them to you?
Keep doubting the narratives you are fed. Keep looking past the cosmetic surface. And above all, stay curious. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.